what is a really remarkable series, I think, and getting more remarkable as I am no longer the principal speaker. I think I see a very positive ascent going on there. Next week we have Reagan Wascom from CSU, who will be doing issues of water quantity, so please rejoin us for that and talk this up with your friends and comrades. We'll follow the process that we did before, which is to have cards, which I guess are in your packets there, so you can certainly give me any feedback on this series and how to make the most of this series and issues we should be taking up. This is, as you know, part of a National Science Foundation 5-year grant. I have asked myself how old I will be when that grant is completed, and then I choose not to think about that. So, but it does mean we'll have many opportunities for more speakers and more occasions, and I think we'll be having a couple of interesting public officials coming into our series here at a certain point too. So I will now introduce the speaker. Oh, by the way, excuse me. So if you have in there a question card, and if you have a question for the speaker, write it down on the card, and after the speaker is, well, maybe gives us like a 5-minute, when she says,
tap dance.
When she tap dances, that will be a sign to us all. That'll open up all kinds of interesting thoughts for us. At that point, we'll collect the questions so that I can kind of have them sorted for by topic. So, it is very much my pleasure tonight to introduce Sue Tierny. I heard a bit about her work. She's a managing principal at Analysis Group in Boston, which seems from every evidence to be a group of very smart people with a significant percentage of women in leadership, and I would not necessarily say that the smartness and let's just say that there's...
Why not?
Well, no. Something very positive is happening there. At Analysis Group, they work on economic, financial, and strategic analysis there in Boston. Sue, I first heard when she was on a National Public Radio debate program, which was, I would say, that audience in Aspen, you guys are so much ahead of that audience in Aspen. That was a group of people who came in without any intention to do anything but leave with exactly the same mindset. That was my feeling, listening to that. And this person kept extraordinary equanimity through that. She was, I don't think, the moderator, which I would call moderate. I think it wasn't can't have been a very pleasant experience, but listening to that and hearing this person's maintained, steady, unflagging equanimity really made me think, oh, it would be very nice to have this person come visit us. And I have heard her speak once or twice since in person, so that has all been validated for me. Her expertise is in energy economics, regulation, and policy with a focus on the electric and gas industries. She's worked with businesses, government agencies, nonprofits, and Indian tribes. She has gone way past me, the ultimate armchair quarterback when it comes to public service. She has been Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Department of Energy, and in the state of Massachusetts, she has served as Secretary for Environmental Affairs and also as a Public Utilities Commissioner. She co-chaired the Department of Energy Agency Review Team for the Obama-Biden Subcommittee. She chairs the Advisory Council of the National Renewable Energy Lab, an important organization in our world, and she is a member of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Energy Report. Sue Tierny received her MA and PhD in Regional Planning at Cornell University, and she has taught at the University of California at Irvine and at MIT. All that is fine, and more than fine, but it is also the case that she grew up in Redlands, California, which is just around the corner from Banning, California, which is my hometown. And so it has been quite fun to discover that Banning and Redlands, the Inland Empire, we are really incredible seedbed for ideas and thinkers. And I know that you already knew that. I don't know why I'm pointing out something so obvious. And I just thinking about those orange groves in Redlands that used to be there, the shiny leaves and beautiful scent. So I shall sniffle briefly over my thoughts of Redlands. But at this point, I'm very happy to introduce to you Sue Tierny, our speaker tonight.
I think I have a wire and you can hear me back in the back?
Yes.
Don't you love a part of the world where they're so insecure about how cool they are that they call themselves the Inland Empire?
Yes.
You guys are really the Inland Empire. My husband was raised in Colorado 3 generations, so we love the Rockies and we come here a lot. But obviously nobody told me the dress code. You know, I came from Boston today, so I hope you'll forgive me. And I've been looking forward to this very much. I imagine that there's probably no one here who doesn't have a point of view about these issues. And my point of view is usually kind of at the middle. So I'll be anxious to hear people at the sides. And as Patty and I said to each other, if the tomatoes start throwing from one side or the other, yeah, we'll just get her up here and we'll get going on with that. So I thought I would talk about what's going on in the big picture on natural gas by first describing my point of view and some of the things that have shaped it, and then talk about the big picture of the world of energy systems and energy markets and energy policy in which natural gas plays a role in the United States. So that is a perspective that makes it hard to think, for me, somebody like me, to not think about how hydraulic fracturing and gas development and the greenhouse gas emissions and all sorts of other things in the gas world fit into all of that. So I'll talk about some of that, try to convince you that it's important. And then I want to give some angles on the natural gas picture and the good sides and the not so good sides of it. And then talk about what I think are some really critical success factors or necessities that we need to think about if presuming that people will proceed with natural gas. So I'm putting up a series of pictures here, which really are, I'm just kind of a hopeless wonk, hopeless participant in reports. The first one on the left is one that really shaped a lot of my own thinking about natural gas and the recent shale gas boom. This was a committee appointed by the Secretary of Energy as part of his advisory board, and the president asked for a small committee to identify things that could be done very soon to improve the environmental footprint and the safety footprint of natural gas production. So we did a horse race, I guess that's, a real sprint to try to go into these issues about environmental impacts to see what was real, to try to look through the literature and a variety of other things. We met with a lot of different public groups, and we issued a report in the summer and fall of 2011. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. But I've been involved in a number of other things too. I don't really have that many clients in the oil and gas industry, but I was head of the policy team for the National Petroleum Council study, which put me amidst all of these folks, and I had to navigate trying to think about what are some recommendations of policy that you could get a broad group of folks from academia, from environmental groups, and from the industry to agree upon. So that was also very important to try to think about what is really prudent development, and what does that look like for natural gas. Then I have been involved in peer reviewing a number of studies which I think have been very important, and I mainly put them up here to call your attention to them. One I'm going to talk to you about, which is the International Energy Agency's Golden Rules for a Golden Age of Gas. These are really practical things that they'll come back at the end of my conversation about what are critical success factors. NREL's Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis just put out a great report that I also was happy to peer review as well. It's very, very solid on a number of issues. So take a look at those things. One of them, last one, is Resources for the Future, which is a group of environmental economists and policy analysts, did a survey of people who are expert in natural gas issues from communities, from environmental groups, from academia, from the industry, and did a survey of what's important and what are the real risk issues. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about that as well. So the context. I figured it's important to remember some basics. In the United States, we use private markets and private investments to make decisions mainly about energy. And the reason I start there is that a lot of people, when they think about gas, either pro or con, think about it as what is government going to do more, and certainly government's involved. But starting and stopping and consuming and producing something like natural gas is done through private markets for the most part. Now, certainly it happens on public lands, and there are public entities who are involved in that, but most fossil fuel in the United States is from private investment. Most electricity production and delivery is through private investment. And most consumption is really from people who are investor-owned utilities. And again, that is really different than in a number of other countries where you really have national government companies who are the extraction industries and the sales. And so we do a lot of things in the United States that are about private property. This is no surprise to all of you, but private property, we sell commodities and stuff. And so when we are involved in using energy, it's a really different world than when people think about it as an investment and getting their money back and not. So that all plays together. And so you all are amongst the millions of people who are in that energy market, because there are millions of players, from small companies to large, to consumers, to the courts, the president, your local city council, especially in Boulder, and the policies that affect something like natural gas and the other energy systems are affected by a complex array of different laws and regulations. Tax laws associated with depreciation allowances, land use laws having to do with the sprawl in a number of places, or who has rights to underground extraction of minerals. So there's a lot of different things, including environmental regulation, that really shape our energy world. It's not just energy policy per se. And then finally, just a couple of things. In the United States and almost everywhere in the world, there is the energy resources are distributed not evenly. Some people have terrific renewable resources. Some people have terrific oil. Some people have terrific coal resources, and for centuries and centuries, that has shaped different investment patterns, consumption patterns, political patterns, for better or for worse. And when there's investment, it's very long-lived. These things that we do in this area hang around a really long time, so that when you've got some kind of disruptive technology, which I'm going to call wind at the moment, it could be, or solar power on rooftops, very disruptive, and you've got the status quo folks just hanging on because they've got investment out there that they're still interested in protecting. So who cares about energy, for heaven's sakes? Why are you not at dinner or having a drink? You are ridiculous. I do appreciate it. It's very nice. So when you think about energy issues, everybody's interested in energy, but not for itself. As a consumer, we're interested in energy because it lights our building or amplifies my voice. But otherwise, you don't really care about energy unless you're in the energy business or it's being developed near you. And so people get very impassioned about certain things, even though in our daily lives, most people, and I'm probably not speaking about people from Boulder when I make this generalization, most people do not have a good connection between what they do as a consumer and what they think about energy from either a policy point of view or what's a good form of energy or bad form of energy. We just drive our vehicles and we turn on our lights. Again, Boulder's a little different. So there's very different interests that we bring as we are involved in thinking about energy. And when you think about the things you could care about, it's everything from most people, so I'll put those different folks up there. Most people as consumers want it cheap, and they never want it volatile. They want it just predictable prices and cheap. So that's on the one side of your brain as a consumer. And then there's all sorts of these other things up there, trade policies, the environmental emissions, what's happening to the drinking water, what's happening to jobs, either in extraction industries or the jobs in the service industries around, the royalty payments to owners. I mean, there's just 1,000 things that people care about. And that just makes this a very complicated world to navigate when you've got so many different people involved in so many different resources. So the United States is so wealthy in terms of resources. For the most part, we've been the Saudi Arabia of coal for a long time. We have tremendous coal resources, and there's parts of the country that grew up around that. Of course, that's around here. Shale gas and other unconventional tight gas and other things are also located in much of the similar areas. Different groups of people involved in those, of course, but wind and solar are tremendously precious and available. The infrastructure that we have for coal and for natural gas, we don't have so much for the upper things, wind and solar, which makes that harder to introduce and bring in. All of those things I just was showing you have been growing in the last decade or two in terms of their increased production. So when you look at those, and they all have different scales, I mean, if you look at wind and solar generation, they're taking off, and that's a really exciting thing. So is natural gas. Shale gas production is taking off, because that only goes from the last decade on that picture. Wow. How did we get back to that one? I don't know. We just missed a lot of my presentation, so that's just fine.
Well, what do you know?
Yeah, what do you know? That's totally fine. So I want to talk about what I was going to show you, and let's see if it comes up here. We're not sure exactly what. See, I'm not an Apple girl. You guys, who's an Apple PC? This is Apple, so the Microsoft to Apple conversion boiled the day. So it makes no difference. It's totally fine. Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about natural gas, and I think some of the charts I have that show how much production is going on and use of it is taking off. We have these tremendous plays in a variety of areas, including the Rockies and the Appalachian areas, in addition to traditional oil patch. And that is introducing tensions that you know very well, because there have been parts of the country that have grown up and been very comfortable with certain types of oil and gas development, and there's certain parts of the country where there has historically been a lot of extraction, and there's new kinds of extraction, and there's all sorts of new tensions. So the gas resource, right now I'm talking about, in my recompiled speech here, I'm talking about what we're observing about the gas boom and the gas benefits and the gas problems. So that's what we're talking about now. And we saw over the last decade, these are estimates of geologists and other experts on how large is the recoverable resource base for gas. And you can see that in the last decade plus, the estimates of what you can get at have changed as a result of technology. That's hydraulic fracturing and directional drilling that give access to a wide and very deep area underground. And that's why those estimates are going up. That's a much bigger resource base than we thought we had in the past. In the West, you see that the federal lands overlap tremendously with the location of natural gas. So that's not natural gas that's just federal lands in the dark color on the left. That's not true in the eastern side of the United States. And so the western side is very much driven by what the Department of Interior's policies will be, and the state policies will be directly as landowners. And much of what you hear about the tensions on the eastern side are very much about the fact that this is on private property. There's stealth land acquisition coming into communities that people didn't expect, and there's a lot of surprise factors going on. So there's very different patterns of gas development. This shows in the past 2 decades from here to here that shale gas development started occurring because of this technology as production from conventional fields was tapering off in the United States. And the trajectory in the most recent Department of Energy EIA report shows that we would expect to see, in a business as usual case, under today's regulatory framework, that kind of growth in tight gas, which you have here in Colorado, as well as shale gas. So that increases the expectations for production from those supplies. That kind of increase has been seen here in Colorado, because that's the curve that you have here from gas production, and most of that new stuff is unconventional here. And these are your wells, so you know what that footprint looks like. It's very, very active here in Colorado. So this is a picture of gas prices over the period from 1990 to the present. And this was a period in which there was a gas bubble and gas demand was not so high. Gas demand started growing about a decade ago because it was pretty cheap. At the same time that conventional supply was tapering off in a lot of areas. And so we saw this period here, the last decade, where there was tremendous volatility of prices and really high prices. The spikes tend to be times when there's a hurricane, takes out the Gulf production. And so you see that tremendous fly up in prices as that production has to come back online. And then you see the collapse of the economy right here. But we have not gone back to those prices the same way that we expected because of unconventional gas. It's relatively cheap to access, and so it's cheaper production than those other ones that we saw. During this period, as prices were rising, the United States built a lot of importation facilities along the coasts for bringing in liquefied natural gas. They're not being used now because we're too cheap here, and that liquefied natural gas is going to other markets in the world. So here is the shares in the power sector. Let's see if this red light comes in. Okay, so remember I showed you those trajectories of a really rapid increase of solar and wind and gas, and that's during this period here, and you cannot really even see solar and wind up there, right? Even though it's like 10 times what it was a decade ago, you still can barely see it on the top. And coal has been very recently squeezed out by natural gas in a lot of parts of the country. The South, which is traditionally a heavily dependent on coal power generation area, they're flipping to natural gas because of the prices that they're seeing. And so that's putting a lot of pressure on coal at the moment. Big fights nationally about the disruptive effect of natural gas there. This is a curve that shows you what people can buy and sell gas for in the futures market. So when you were standing in March 2008 and you wanted to buy gas that would be delivered here in next January, you could buy it for a contract that was almost $10. That's what people were buying and selling gas for. And over the years, these forward contracts, these are actual transactions, have dropped down as gas has become much cheaper to build, cheaper to develop. Prices today are about $3.50. They went a little bit lower than that. Let's see if I can show you that price again. So they went a little bit lower than that to about $2, which is way below the cost of production. So people brought on wells, and you can't really turn off wells if you want to keep the integrity of the production. So once you bring something on in response to prices, you're in an oversupply situation if you're a producer. So that's what we saw, and now you could get a long-term contract for gas. In fact, Xcel Energy did that for the changes of power plants here in Colorado that you could never have gotten before because people weren't willing to bet that gas prices would stay low for a while. So I mentioned that that's putting pressure on coal. The US EPA issued last year a rule that affects coal-fired power plants and oil plants. Those are shown in the red and yellow dots up there on the upper map. And those are subject to the mercury and air toxics rules. And for public health reasons, those will have to put on back-end controls to control the toxic emissions. So they can operate until 2015. But gas prices are already bringing many of those to retire. So these are the announced retirements. Again, if it were only the EPA rules, you could still operate till 2015. But the gas prices are causing many of these coal plants to operate so low, it's not worth keeping them open. So part of the story of what I've just been describing with a lot of coal, fossil fuel in the power generation mix is the carbon dioxide emissions from the power sector. So it's a horrible, ugly curve. That's my lifetime up there. And that's just the growth of the American society, heavily dependent upon fossil fuels, and our emissions have just been steadily rising until the last couple of years, when the economy and gas have been causing those to go slightly down. But when you look ahead for power generation, let's see if I did any balloons on this. I did not. So you would expect to see, I told you that gas is squeezing out coal a little bit. Here we are today. You're taking off a little bit of wind and solar on the top, and you still expect to see that grow. But in a business as usual forecast, natural gas grows and coal still plays a role in this. This is based on current policy of the United States governments and the state governments. So you expect to see not that much change in the power mix, for better or for worse. That is the picture up there. Okay, so there's a lot of debate and a lot of scientific research and some unknowns about the extent to which gas is cleaner from a greenhouse gas point of view than coal. And most people have historically talked about the natural gas-related emissions from burning gas in a power plant. Those are called combustion emissions. But there's obviously emissions when you're drilling and flaring gas. So pre-production, production, processing, moving it along the pipeline for leakages and stuff. And there's a lot of different estimates. And so there's a famous Cornell study. Cornell, I am a Cornell grad. Cornell has folks who are saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they have folks saying this is the devil incarnate. And so those are reflected on these different estimates of what you would expect for emissions of, and that's principally methane coming related to natural gas. So we don't know some of those estimates, and there in the last year there have been a lot of studies that have begun to examine what we know about the extent to which the factors that are used by the EPA to estimate these emissions, how grounded they are. One study, this one from NREL's Joint Institute, JISEA, this was one of the main things that they looked at, and they said that if the estimates are on the low end, it's clearly the case that natural gas is cleaner than coal when you look across its entire life cycle. But if it's at this Cornell guy's level, if he's right, then they're very close in terms of their emissions over time. So there is work needed in that area to answer those questions. So this is what it looks like, a cross-section of the Earth in a nice, pretty picture of what it's like to drill down. And this is about, depending upon your geology, this is about anything from 4,000 to 8,000 to 10,000 feet that I'm showing up here. And you've got a lot of activity on the top. You guys have you all seen these things? Hands up, yes? Have you gone down 8,000 feet? Now, you've seen the top, right? So you know what the top looks like. And it's like an industrial site in many respects. And there's big water pits. There is a place where you have to store water once it's come back up after it's injected in. You've got a lot of trucks coming in. You've got chemical holding tanks. But then you're drilling way down. And I believe that the most risky thing is the point at which the cementing encasing of the actual well goes through the water table is the most important thing, not what's going on down here in the hydraulic fracturing. And it's not to say there are not risks down there, and I'll come back to some of those in terms of seismic responses in terms of places where there may be cracks in some geologies. But like any drilling through a water table, that is the critical element. That has to have high integrity no matter what. So you know what it looks like. So these are some of the pictures of local impacts on communities. Infrared picture of a tank holding some of the chemicals, and that's again they show up with infrared and don't show up to the naked eye. Flaring and venting. I think these are from the Marsalis area because it's green, not like parts of Colorado. The piping that has to bring water in or take gas out, the gathering system, and tanker trucks. So that's kind of why I call that industrial activity. I'm going to show you a series of maps, and these are from the Resources for the Future study. It's not so important to focus for the moment on what each state is doing, but you're going to see the imprint of the states are doing really different things on this. These are activities that are rooted in land use law and development law, which is state basis. And there certainly are issues that are federal, interstate water impacts, interstate air issues, but for the most part, this is a state-regulated activity. So, for example, the policies of states with regard to whether or not companies have to disclose what's in the fracturing fluid to hold open the porous rock and allow the gas to move forward. You know, some require it, those are blues, and some don't. And there's heavy debate, as you probably know very well, about that question and what gets disclosed. I'll come back to this. I will say now what I was going to say later. The Secretary of Energy Advisory Board said most people focus on disclosure of what's going in. But in fact, I'm really interested to know what's coming out. You have normally occurring radioactive materials in certain areas that come up with the backflow of water. You've got other materials from underground that are coming back, and how is that being disposed of or managed? That kind of disclosure doesn't tend to be on people's radar screens. Disclosure here is, what's the fracking fluid? What is in that fluid and the chemicals? Oops, sorry. So the well test, water well testing, whether or not you have to test the wells in the vicinity of prospective drilling before you drill, so you can compare baseline to something that happens. Huge variation in policy. Whether you track what happens to the water once it comes out and it's been used and recycled and then needs to be managed or disposed, huge variation across the states. Whether you require a liner on those pits that I showed you, those water pits that are either water with chemicals in them or not. So even the requiring of those liner, Texas requires no lining of those pits. That's amazing. So you can, my point is these vary tremendously, and there's great chauvinism of states that they're doing it the right ways across the states. So this is a number of inspectors per wells. Okay, so this one is probably interesting to see. If you're a dark color, like Colorado, that means you have more wells to inspect per inspector. So that means that guy or gal's got to go to a lot of places compared to the light colors, the light blue colors. Just like, you have fewer kids in your classroom, right? You've got 45 kids in your classroom. Or, so it's 500 to 1,600 producing wells per inspector as of 2010 is Colorado. So the debate on this is completely polarized. I know you know that. The industry thinks of hydraulic fracturing as meaning something very specific. And the very specific thing is that thing that happens 8,000 feet underground. The fracturing of the rock with a charge and the keeping open of the fracture so that you can, under high pressure, liquid to move the gas. That is hydraulic fracturing. And so when you hear the industry saying there are no cases of contamination associated with hydraulic fracturing, remember what it is they're saying hydraulic fracturing means. That doesn't mean drilling through the water table. That means hydraulic fracturing way down there. They say it's very regulated. I showed you there's a very high degree of regulation. It varies tremendously. They would say there are small risks, and clearly we need to develop this prudently. We need to develop it in a responsible way. And we need to continuously improve, and there are best practices that are shared, and disclosure should be a voluntary matter for a variety of reasons. So I'm kind of doing a cartoon character, but kind of not, because I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Cartoon character or not, you can decide. So for the opponents, fracking is the whole damn thing. Everything from those trucks coming in, to the flaring, to the leaks in the pipeline system for natural gas, to a natural gas economy that's disrupting renewable energy development. Everything is fracking. Maybe you disagree, but that's what I observe. The opponents would say, indeed, we've had contamination. Take a look at Gasland. The regulatory rules are inadequate everywhere, and so we should not be proceeding in places we don't know what's going on. And the states are playing catch up, and the inspectors are too cozy with the industry. So you can see I'm kind of exaggerating both sides. I hope you think I'm doing it fairly on both sides. For the most part, in the public's meetings that I've attended, people are most concerned about water quality, water supply issues, water treatment and management. They're less concerned about the air emissions issues, and very much in tension about some of the community impacts, the jobs versus the other things. So clearly in this debate that Patty saw, that one of the debate was we should shut it down versus we should proceed cautiously. And in this model, it's kind of a dangerous experiment. We don't know things, so we should not allow it to proceed. So that polarized debate that I just characterized in kind of stark terms leads to important public trust problems, right? So from where I sit and try to observe what's going on, there's a huge gap between perception issues and what we know and don't know, and I'm so glad you're doing this series on this to identify what we do and do not know. I've been in the energy scene, I guess I'll call it that, for 30 years, and so I was around during the nuclear protest era. It's way uglier now than that was, and that was really, really divisive and ugly. And this one I think is even more divisive. And it also on the perception versus some of the risks, there are clear development pressures, clear. I mean, those pressures are very strong and real. There is lack of transparent data, which again risks this polarization between these two sides. My personal pet peeve about the American Petroleum Institute is that it has standards that are world-class standards for drilling, production, management of hydrocarbons. They are followed around the world, and they bring a lot of technical horsepower to bear on those technical standards, and I really mean that. And it exists in the same organization that goes down on its sword at lobbying for oil and gas, and especially for oil. And so to me, having a lobbying organization with a standard setting function is mingling things in ways that increases the polarization in not very helpful ways. The ways that companies in this business have always kind of stealthily come into areas to buy up land and rights so that people don't really know what's happening until it's happened to them, that's also polarizing things. I think the industry is more in a defensive position and surprised about this in areas outside of oil patch than they ever expected to be. So they're way on the defensive. And from the point of view of the nation and its energy interests, I think there are critical issues. I showed you that price curve. Remember the volatile prices last decade. And then people's expectation, we're going to have nice, cozy, low prices. The only way you have cozy, low prices for a commodity like this is if people have access to the resource, it's available for development, and it's there. And so the biggest source of volatility is public trust issues that will lead to moratorium and be a very disruptive pattern for this resource we have in the United States. So when people talk about it as the greatest thing since sliced bread, it ignores the reality of this very important public trust issue. I think the Joint Institute study called this the public license to operate. And if we violate that in many, many, many places, we will not have the benefits. So, and here's a picture of the moratorium that exists in some localities and in others. And so if you are blue, you're a statewide moratorium. If you're light blue, it's a local ban. Dark blue is a statewide ban also. If you're gray or pink, you don't have a ban yet. So what is necessary to deal with this public trust issue? So I'm going to talk about some of those studies that I identified to share with you what they say really are critically important things if we're going to have natural gas. Now, before I actually go into this, remember I started with the fact that we live in the United States where most resources of energy supplies are in private hands. People own the resources, they want to do something with them, they want to stop somebody else from doing it. It's about private decisions. And so a lot of these things that I'm about to describe are government telling private people what they're going to do. So there's a growing consensus, I think, that there are things that can be done materially to improve the environmental footprint and risk patterns. So the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board report that I was part of, we said this was 7 people. Some people have had a long-standing relationship to the oil and gas industry. Some people were head of Environmental Defense Fund and environmental secretaries from various states. And we all had to get in a room and figure out what we thought was real and not. And lots of rooms, lots of meetings and stuff. But we agreed 100% consensus on these concepts, that there are legitimate areas of concern: water, drinking water, the potential for contamination of drinking water through methane movement, water consumption, water supply issues, how much water is used here. And clearly backflow. When the water comes out of the earth, then what do you do with it? The air pollution, we thought this was as important as the water issues because of local ground level precursors of smog, but also for the methane emissions for greenhouse gases, because that's a very powerful pollutant from a greenhouse gas point of view. Community disruption, the land use tensions are very real. And a lot of sensitive areas that are under a lot of pressure from ecological point of view. And clearly the cumulative impacts of those maps with so many red dots is a big deal. And yet remember, mostly decisions about whether to add another red dot are made on one-off basis by private developers with a private landowner, and government reacts to whether they can drill or not. So it's that cumulative effect. We said there's an urgency from an environmental point of view. And so we said we need to take these things seriously, and we need to know better what's happening because we need to measure things a lot better. Before you do something, while you're doing something, after you're doing it. So those parts along that value chain are really important. There are many ways in best practices to prevent some of the problems, and they should be more than just best practices, they should be more uniform practices. And that if these are not addressed, there'll be moratorium and all sorts of other things happening. And so the benefits, which we said were game-changing potentially for the United States, are entirely tied to doing this in a good way. So these are more of the recommendations we made. Better information, better regulation, including, there's a very good, very small little engine that could institution called Stronger. You've heard of it? So it's the state regulators for oil and gas. It's a peer review function in which a state says, I would like to have my regulatory rules and procedures reviewed and learn about what I should do and to improve them and go forward. It's a very good thing, but states sometimes don't put their hands up because who wants to be criticized publicly for that? Colorado did, and say they got their peer review about a year and a half ago. Lots of checklists of things that they ought to do to improve things. But there's a lot of states that have not been reviewed in the last period in which we've seen this takeoff of development, and some states have never been peer reviewed. So that's one thing, that things like that are simple ideas of a better improvement in regulation. Let's see if I can get this. So this resources for the future study, I'm going to quiz you on this when I'm done, because I'm sure you can read it. It is this study where they interviewed, this was the most horrible interview tool I've ever answered. I think it took like 15 hours. It was ridiculous. And what kind of a jerk am I? But so they had quite a few hundred people, again, from environmental groups, community groups, scientific community, industry, people who know something about this business, who are in the expert category, to then answer these various questions about pathways for risk associated with unconventional gas development. And there was tremendous consensus amongst those groups around about a dozen things that are risk areas. And they have to do with surface water quality. I mean, there's no surprises here, but there was tremendous consensus across all of those, and that these were the areas that needed to be dealt with. Habitat disruption was important to the experts, but most people in communities don't think about this as being an important one, but it's very important. And air quality and emissions has not been enough on the radar screens of states as they've been developing things, but the experts saw that this was very important. I mentioned that the International Energy Agency, which is the agency that was set up over the last couple of decades to represent developing countries who see themselves as held hostage to the oil cartels internationally, so that's kind of its background. And over the years, it's done a number of different things that have been very useful. It does projections about energy supply, a number of rules to help nation states be less vulnerable to oil countries. One of the things that they did in the last year was look at what could be done, what could be done to improve the development of shale gas, because they too see it as a potential game changer. For example, Poland has a lot of shale gas, and Poland gets its gas supply cut off by Russia. And so it's strategically important. So there are lots of reasons why this could be a game changer internationally. China has a lot of shale gas. So the golden rules have to do with a whole lot of things that should be the absolute benchmark for what people do when they are regulating. And so the list is here, measuring, the same as what we said in the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board. Make sure you're drilling in places where you know what's going on in the ecology, and a variety of other things. So this is part of this consensus that's growing about what needs to be improved. And I'm calling this the sensible middle. And so air emissions, I've already talked to you about these, a variety of different air emissions. We need to control things better and understand them. The EPA has issued rules affecting the green completions or the drilling process, so there's less flaring and venting of gas into the atmosphere, but it rolls in over a several year period of time. Water issues, EPA has a study underway, quite extensive study. It will not be done for another year. By the way, I am very good friends with the new EPA administrator. Oh, the nominee. She is awesome, you guys. She is awesome. So She has a Massachusetts accent, so you're going to really laugh when you hear her talk. So there's a lot of things that states should be doing to improve things. And then again, cumulative impact. One of the things we said in the Secretary of Energy Advisory Committee was drawn from my experience as environmental secretary in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we have an environmental impact statement requirement, and you have to go through this process. I mean, we're Taxachusetts, right? Regulatory heaven. But you have to go through this process when you want to build a road, you want to build a box, big box store, biohazard facility, and you would have to do it for a drill site. And I had 10 days to decide whether there were environmental impacts and to identify what had to be done. And so it was something that there was a public notice process. Nobody got a stealth issue coming in about some big problem that kind of surprised them. That kind of issue also can enable looking at cumulative impacts. And there's ways to organize that doesn't hold up development so much, but really gets transparent information out there. I think that's the end of my slides, saying we all need to improve in every one of the states in order to keep the social license to operate. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What we do now is, if you would pass the cards with questions towards the middle, then we'll have
The sensible middle.
the sensible
How's
middle.
that?
Right? That's right. Pass everything towards the middle, and I will just ask a few questions to get us started here. The first one, I would like to go with your characterization of the industry as kind of locked in defensiveness and not finding the key to get out of that defensiveness. What is there an army of psychologists that should be unleashed on this, or psychotherapists, or what's the way to get that loosened up?
Well, I think there's a lot to learn from some industries who they've gone through the gauntlet in making mistakes about how to work with communities. And there's a lot of good lessons learned about how you start your discussions with communities rather than react to things. And so I think that I don't know that there's shrinks and psychologists, but there's a lot of great advice that they could be getting.
That members of the industry who hold to the disclosure must only be voluntary.
That's just about everybody.
Not everybody.
Just about everybody.
Not everybody.
Okay.
Okay, maybe okay. So is there...
Colorado's a wonderful example where it got passed that it's...
Yeah. That seems to be a remarkably effective way to heighten public distrust.
Yes, I agree with that. To have it, to say we're not going to disclose.
Yeah, if you wanted to heighten public distrust, that would be a very good way to do it.
I agree. And I do think that there has been a lot of movement on this in the last 4 years with the frack focus disclosure place. But I think still in Colorado, it is a limited list of chemicals that are disclosed. And is it only what's going in, not what's coming out?
Right,
yeah.
Coming out. What I'm interested in asking as an historian, the progressive era, and in a moment here I'll take some cards and relieve you of my question here, but in the progressive era, when I was in graduate school as a girl, we looked at the progressive era and we
I thought she was going to say, when I was a girl in the progressive era.
That,
Since we're about the same age,
I know, we're very close.
whack you.
Actually, this is a very big problem because I do sometimes tell my American History Survey course, I tell the students that when I was a girl, I had quite a crush on Woodrow Wilson, and they find that...
Wouldn't you hear it that way?
Well, what the problem is now is that they do think I was a contemporary of Woodrow Wilson, so it's really not that striking a notion. I did not know about his bad attitudes on race. So, but in the progressive era, in our graduate seminars, we found a lot of behind-the-scenes correspondence with Theodore Roosevelt and others, where industry people were saying, "Help us." Mm-hmm. Our reputations, the jungle with Upton Sinclair, our reputation for for having public trust are very bad. So we will oppose you in public, but we need you to help us.
And I do think that in the past 2 years, there has been a sea change of that kind of activity. Beg your pardon?
Louder.
Oh, sorry, I thought from where I stand, I sound like I'm yelling. Sorry. I think that we've seen a great deal of improvement of willingness to be open about needing to improve relations, and there are working groups in a number of different states or regions where they're trying to find cooperative ways to work with communities and a variety of other things. So there is leadership in the industry on those issues.
I have several questions here that are actually along the lines of what I was asking. What can we do to get more hard tests and data about the industry and its practice? Is it just not available? Can government require it? So that your items about full monitoring, and how do we get there?
Yeah, government certainly could require it. You saw the list of the various ways that states do things, and part of it has to do with the culture of regulations in different states, and some states really don't like it so much, and it would be very difficult to amass the public movement to make that happen in some of the states. But others where can really be a meeting of minds about how to define things in ways like Colorado has done to move things ahead. So government would need to do a lot of things there. Many in the industry believe that there can be voluntary ways to improve the disclosure and also tracking of information. So there's work on that too.
And, while we're on disclosure, Colorado requires disclosure, but not of trade secrets. Are these trade secrets disclosed to someone in the government and not the public? Is that...
Great question. The way we thought about this in the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board was that just like you read on the soup can what the ingredients are, we're not looking at Kraft's. Does Kraft make soup? I don't know. I mean, you're not looking at the recipe, and the recipe is the trade secret part. So we're asking for the same thing that you read in the can about what you're about to consume. That's the same thing we're doing here. I am not aware that the state governments require disclosure even in a protected way of what's trade secrets.
Well, here's, this just is, I wish I had a more youthful mind. I'm getting it coming together. Thank you. I am doing all right here. But this one, since you just mentioned this, I think we might take a second on this. Do you think Gina McCarthy will be confirmed as the new leader of the EPA? And if she is, how do you think that the policies regarding carbon emissions control might change with her?
So have you read about Gina McCarthy? So she's, right now, for the last 4 years, she has been Senate confirmed head of air issues at EPA. And before that, she was in Connecticut as a state regulator, and before that, she was in Massachusetts. And when I was environmental secretary, she was head of the toxic use disclosure, basically, for toxic chemicals in the state. So and before that, she worked for a local government on a variety of land use development issues. So she has tremendous experience. The reason I am so pleased that the president has nominated her is that she understands the complexities of these issues, the realities of the things that I've just described in terms of different points of view. She has a compass that is set on human health, protection of sensitive areas, and she just is very pragmatic, but she's very focused on making sure that the job of the EPA is protective. So she also has been very much a leader in the last couple of years, including when she was in the Northeast in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. She was one of the architects that got that going. We have that in 10 states in the Northeast. It's a cap on carbon emissions. She knows the Clean Air Act, and she knows the existing authorities that can be used. So to me, when the president said climate was coming back in his inaugural address, I thought there might be a chance he was going to appoint Gina, because I think she's just got such a backbone. And one of the things is she is such a straight shooter. She tells you things you might not like to hear, but she will not lie, and she will not be deceitful. She is such a wonderful public servant. So She's going to be raked through the coals by the coal industry, however.
Oh, the coals. Oh, the coals. The coals. Well, they'd be well
She
supplied
will.
for that. So, I want
Because of that mercury rule.
several questions here about, back to sticking with air quality. What is your impression of the prevalence of reduced emissions completion, or I guess green completion, versus venting and flaring in the industry? And I will say, as an historian, flaring, I understand it's an infrastructure issue, and I think that would be the next place to go, because we have a couple of questions about that. But in North Dakota, to see flaring, oh my goodness, this valuable resource. We've talked about how important petrochemicals are for all kinds of our outdoor gear, which matters very much to us here in this community. So to see it flaring, so where are we on the green completion versus things that are the opposite of green completion?
So there are technologies that are available today and used in many places that are these green completions. It's a process that essentially strips out the hydrocarbons so that you're not putting them into the air. And so I think of it as like a little vacuum cleaner kind of filter thing. And it's a valuable product. It's clear that there would be a lot more venting and flaring if it were more economical to protect it. But these are really now going to be standard practice. They're required in Colorado. Do I recall that that's the case? Yeah. So Colorado is one in the vanguard that proved that this was commercially available technology. But there's still a lot of infrastructure that's required to get there.
Okay, I had a little breakdown here in actual paper management, but I know what I was trying to put together here. The one question, which I'm paraphrasing now since
It's in there somewhere.
I feel like I'm having a dream in which I've been given little pieces of paper to keep track of in front of a large, intelligent
Does
audience.
anybody watch Homeland? This is like The Wall.
Okay, so there is one item here about the Boulder City Council is considering a possible moratorium. Well, in fact, in June, they will make a longer range decision about what regulations to go for. And that I am matching up with the question about your having stated that that the natural gas industry, or the controversies about natural gas today are equivalent to or worse than the controversies about nuclear energy. So there are a package of questions here about, which hinge on that question. Will natural gas encounter some of the same fate that the nuclear has of such widespread distrust and concern that really blocks investment? And what will become of the American energy profile if relationships with communities do bring more and more moratorium? Is there a scenario where...
Great question.
Okay.
Whoever did those questions, those are great
there
questions.
they are. They're out here somewhere. There.
One of the wacky things we do in the United States when we think about different forms of energy production is that we have a whole different framework for different fuels. So in the nuclear industry, after the bomb, and when the industry started to develop and attempt to put commercial uses of the atom, that was federally preempted. States do not have rights to site nuclear power plants. So that's a federal action, and it's highly protected in court cases that's the U.S. government decides about that. And so one of the community problems there was this, Washington versus localities and the high, very low probability of catastrophic problems. And with a scientific community that in my personal, I studied this many years ago in university and for partly on my dissertation, was really the scientific community until they started splitting about some of the risks, and that made it very, very, that engendered public distrust when the scientists themselves were no longer in the same tower. So fast forward today, this is locally regulated. This is proliferation all over the thing, a completely different kind of system. You have many different kind of media, air, water, ecologies, all sorts of different things going on, and a less capital intensive thing. So it's a very, very different thing. Colorado could take it off the map, moratorium, and my hunch is Oklahoma won't, and Texas won't, and Louisiana won't. So I think it's a lot of cultural issues that are going to roll out in different places in different ways. That was a long-winded answer.
No,
Sorry.
And I left poor France out in that question. There's a
France.
France has banned fracking 2 years ago. Do you know how this came
Oh.
about? Was it based on fear or based on a rational approach because they are close to 70% nuclear?
I love that.
Okay,
So France has been able to develop an almost entirely nuclear electric system because they have such a strong central government. I mean, it's just amazing. And I mean, the amazing part is that a central government can just kind of decide and then make it the system. That's not the world we live in over here. So surprising about the fracking decision, and I think it's because I don't know enough about the politics there to know what drove it.
Okay, so I have a number of questions about prices. And one of them, I'll start with this one. If gas prices are sometimes below production costs or close to that, why do producers start new wells?
Great question. Producers have a use it or lose it kind of license often. So that means if you've gone out and gotten some leasing of a resource or the rights to go on it, you have to actually start the process or you're going to lose the lease. And so that creates incentives for people to start a lot of things, a lot of activity around, even though they may not want to develop it. So there's a lot of things that are begun. There's also something about the way in which the production works is that it's relatively quick to start the process and you can bring the production online pretty fast. Pretty good payoff compared with hydraulic fracturing and directional drilling and unconventional gas compared to conventional gas. You can predict where you're going to get something much better. So you can go in quickly and respond, so there's a big rush, but then you can't turn it off. So there's a big oversupply that they have to then let work off through demand side. Long answer, sorry.
No.
You guys, I'm sure you want to go.
They wrote all these damn things, is all I'm going to say here, so that is not really
These
good.
are great questions.
They are very good, and you'll notice what a fine system I have worked out here.
It's
So
great.
they're not going for a bit. Well, okay, thank you. So we have now market economics of fracking, not unrelated to what we just did there. Given that gas prices are low and likely to stay that way, might it make economic sense to leave the resource here in the ground, here in Colorado for instance, and wait for supply to tighten before extracting? By then, the science will theoretically be more reliable as well to guide this.
So the answer to that, my answer to that question begins with that very first part that I said, that again, the decisions about whether to drill, unless a state or a locality says no, it's a private action, right? You don't, I don't know who could say the United States is going to wait until we know more before we do something, because of the nature of the whole system. And so Colorado could decide to do that. Colorado could decide to do that and wait and say, well, for example, in Oklahoma, the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission has as part of the law that they must provide access to the resource and husband the conservation of the hydrocarbons, as well as protect to make sure it's done right. So there are really different philosophies about what it means to have a resource that is available. Really different theories about what's the right way to do. And in fact, if you think about markets, these prices have really dropped the number. I did have a slide somewhere on rig counts. So 3 years ago, there were 1,200 rig counts a week. that we're down to 400 now, because that's the market's response, and there won't be so much new going on until the prices go up.
Okay, a little bit more.
No one has asked me about exports.
I haven't. Oh, good. I've got them here. Don't even think for a second here. I haven't got that. I've got that. Just a quick more on the prices. Comment on why U.S. energy prices are the lowest in the developed world. And
Because it's in the U.S. Constitution that we have really cheap energy.
I remember that part. And you're in a transition to talking about the low prices of gas and their impact on the shift to the renewables, and the question about the competition of low natural gas prices that's where you're going.
Okay, so we deliver energy resources through markets, we regulate them in certain ways, and some of those energy resources, like oil, operate in global markets, and the prices are set in global markets. You can move oil around. For the most part, gas has been a continental market. So the prices are tied largely to how much it costs to get the stuff up out of the ground and move it around. And right now, one of the reasons that prices are going down is because it's cheaper to do it through hydraulic fracturing than through the old-fashioned way. So you see folks driving down the prices as a result of that kind of phenomenon. So you would expect, as demand happens, remember I showed you that picture how much the prices went up in the beginning of last decade, and that was because so many power plants came on that wanted to use gas. And you would expect to see more power plants running on gas, like they're going to here in Colorado. We'll expect to see prices go up from where they are at 3.5 to maybe 4.5 over the next couple of years. If we export gas through private investors building big old honkin' liquefaction facilities to liquefy the molecules of gas and then move them abroad, prices will go up somewhat. My guess from the literature is that we would see maybe 50 cents, that kind of equalization of prices. They would start to go up with a small piece of our market tied to a bigger demand outside. So that's why Dow Chemical hates exports, because Dow Chemical wants to use gas as a feedstock in new manufacturing facilities for petrochemicals in the United States that they moved offshore. And if gas is expensive, they won't make that investment in the United States. So that's one of the things that's attention about trade. The Department of Energy has to approve trade licenses to export natural gas. And they will probably do it, I think, through open trade policies. My personal view is the place to deal with addressing environmental issues is on the ground and not through trade policies. And that's what DOE has done so far in issuing those licenses. But it would be nice to kind of connect the dots of some of these things about on-the-ground regulation as being one of the things that's a quid pro quo. Was that enough words in answer to that one?
That seems good. And now you wanted exports, did you? Well, you didn't say you wanted exports, but you wanted questions about that. Has the gas rush turned the U.S. into a gas exporter yet? Will it and should it? Who benefits? And directly, and of course with that, is the U.S. exporting natural gas? Do we have plans to do so? Why, given the risk of production?
Couple things. Right now, the U.S. Exports a teeny bit of natural gas at the borders of the country, not much liquefied gas. We have historically imported a tiny bit of gas. About 95% of the gas we use comes from the U.S. Some of it comes from Alberta to the eastern part of the United States. So we tend to be, this is a domestic resource, it's tended to be used locally. So in some markets, like oil, we move it back and forth, and we operate in let's see, cotton, right? Cotton moves back and forth, rice moves back and forth. There are lots of things that we move back and forth for better or for worse, because we live in a country that has trade agreements that allow for open trade. So my guess is that the U.S. would be hauled up to the World Trade Organization if we imposed a border on natural gas exports. So that's one of the frameworks in which the U.S. operates. So the folks who are experts on trade matters would say that we don't prevent, so what do you export from Colorado internationally? Skiing, right? People come, well, I guess that's not exporting. I don't know the example to use here, that some people have, what is it? Beer. Beer.
Great deal about
You export cores, I guess, I don't know. Wheat, okay. So it would be like telling those wheat farmers, you don't get to do wheat. You got to sell it in the U.S. markets. They would say, well, that's going to depress our prices. You know, it's a very, very complicated story. There's no right or wrong, but that's one of the answers on that. And what was the question about? Oh, and the reason people are interested is that while it costs billions of dollars of private investment to build one of these liquefaction facilities, right now our gas is $3.50. In Europe, it's about 14, and I haven't looked recently, but that order of magnitude. And in Japan, it's about 18. There's a big difference in price between those two. So it's worth making the investment, sending it over on cargoes, and selling it somewhere else. So that's what's going on there.
Okay, a couple of, and this is really, this is manageable now. We're really.
Excellent. That's great.
The dinner that we didn't have a while ago that's on the horizon. Here, when and why was fracking exempted from the Clean Air and Clean Water Act? Why was industry exempted from 7 key national acts that protect us and the environment? What was the rationale? If they hadn't been exempted, how would this have affected development of natural gas? And the bills are safe drinking water, clean air, clean water, NEPA, RCRA, and CERCLA.
I don't think that the premise of the question is 100% right. So the Clean Air Act, it doesn't exempt natural gas. There are facilities of certain sizes that and of emissions that qualify for things under the Clean Air Act. And so there are definitional issues that are bringing it in under the Clean Air Act. Clean Water Act is relevant. For example, if you have a POTW, publicly owned treatment works, and that's a wastewater treatment, a sewage treatment facility, because you're injecting into navigable waters of the United States, that's a Clean Water Act issue. That is one of the reasons why Pennsylvania said we couldn't send, they couldn't send the stuff through their POTW facilities. So there are things about natural gas that do come under those acts. There is a big loophole, and it's in the Safe Drinking Water Act for injection of materials underground. It's called the Halliburton loophole. And it came in the 2005 Energy Policy Act, and I just think that makes the public trust problem a little worse.
Yes, I skipped a few water things in my organizational frenzy here. I don't seem to have that much on air stuff, but I do have a couple more water things, and I want to go back to deep wells, deep old wells, poorly installed. What about wells at depth, old wells that are not properly cased and can leak from depth, 8,000 to 10,000 feet to surface? Are they of concern? Colorado has many of these, so
yes, those are concerned, and states need to be as vigilant on abandoning wells and what happens to those, and making sure that when a well is shut off and not going to be producing anymore, that it is under a regulatory framework. So yes, that's a concern in a lot of different places.
The production curve of a fracked well, there are reports that 70% of production is in the first year of a fracked well, that a fracked well is used. How does this affect cost and viability of fracked wells?
The curve looks like this. I used to be a professor in the chalk era.
How smoothly she does that.
And I'm always getting white stuff along here. So it does drop off pretty fast. And so one of the reasons that you see another well is that you have to keep doing that in order to keep the production up. And so you can do from one pad, so now this was one picture, this was production over time. Now, we're transforming dimensions. This is now depth. Okay, so one of the things they do is that they may go down and take a different direction to get a next producing well off the same pad as a way to minimize stuff. And there are ways to do that kind of stuff. But yes, that phenomena occurs, but that occurs in a variety of different kinds of hydrocarbons.
Okay, and now just a couple of big, in the arid West, what is the rationale for removing vast amounts of water from the hydrological cycle? A number of years from now, the gas resources will be depleted, but we will still be thirsty. Colorado already over-appropriates its water resources, so how should we decide where the water for fracking should come from? It seems the industrial the industrial sector is primarily concerned with cost reduction. How does that influence their choices in appropriation? Okay, that one I'm having a little with handwriting there, but also, and flowback water is a part of this. Is this water reclaimed? Can it be recycled? Is it actually removed from the hydrological cycle?
So there are great improvements being made in recycling and reuse of water. In part for this reason, in part because of state policies to encourage that and the development of technology to do that. But at some point, this is water intensive at the beginning of the process, not over the life of the well. So there's a lot of water used up front. The industry is often eager to say that the water use is less than a golf course. That's true. Over the life of a golf course, you would use a lot more than you will in a fracturing process. But you use a lot of water intensively at the beginning of the process to get it going. So in each area where gas development is occurring, there are different systems for accessing water. Some of it's wells, if you can get ownership. Some of it's off of a public water system. So there are a variety of ways. And I think the ways in which a developer gets access to water vary considerably. So there are problems with moving water from one basin to another hydrological basin. That's happened with a lot of the trucking of water. So I think this is a matter in which states need to pay attention to this question. There are some states where there are plenty of water resources. Surprisingly, So some states require a replenishment and reinjection of the water back into the land for land conservation reasons. I guess I'll call it the whole integrity of the underground. Some states do not allow that at all. I mean, so they're entirely different philosophies, in part because of the different geologies. But if in Colorado there are rules about getting water, that's a place you ought to take a look at this issue. And I don't know how it's done here in Colorado. I don't know how decisions are made.
Reagan Wascom, who will be here next week, is sitting there, and he'll be doing the water quality thing with the particular. So we'll
hold those questions.
Yeah, we will. I'll keep them right here for you. So, and then just like maybe two more here, and then
we'll let you go
through here. So this is about proximity. And for instance, we have a consideration. 1,000 signatures were delivered to the by Boulder County residents to the City Council regarding wellhead distances to living areas. What is your opinion of that setback issue? And then as a larger picture of that, how much of the frackophobia is a NIMBY reaction? Will the actual impact be to just shift production to rural states?
Oh, wow. Those are impossible questions. First of all, I don't know on the setback issue. I don't know what my opinion is on that, and I don't know how different states are handling that issue. Is that the first thing I said I didn't know? There are so many things I don't know, but I don't know that one at all. The second one.
The second one was, is it the current reaction against fracking in an area like this, is that primarily a NIMBY reaction? And will in a more populated area like this, will the reaction or the anti-fracking thing just increase the burden on rural areas?
I think the culture of development, economic development, varies so much, right? You guys live in the United States like I do. The attitudes about a big box store, Redlands, in Redlands, Southern California, they fought viciously about some big box store years ago and went crazy when it went in a little donut hole land of county land in the middle of Redlands. And that's an area that, I mean, that was their culture that they didn't care about. So big box store is going to go right next door, was going to go somewhere else. In this area, there's so much about development, what people's communities attract, and what they try to send away, that it's completely wrapped up in. I think it's the community values as opposed to just NIMBY. I think there's a part of it that's NIMBY, but I look in parts of the Marcellus in the Appalachian area, that's where oil was first produced in the United States, and coal. I mean, it's not as though they didn't have any extraction industries, but that they haven't had them for 80 years. Right. And so people just are not used to those kinds of land uses.
Why isn't there more focus on energy efficiency and conservation?
I could have given you my energy efficiency and conservation story, but I didn't. That is the first fuel that has to be used. But I don't think we're going to conserve our way out of energy. And I think it's, for better or for worse, we are in a world of fossil fuels for some time. The speech I gave during the inaugural weekend, there's a TED Talk of mine, where I think we are going to be in a world where eventually, to live in an acceptable climate, we have to decarbonize our energy system. We have to be as efficient as we possibly can. But if you don't allow gas in the United States anywhere, we'll have coal a whole lot longer. And to me, everything I've seen makes me willing to say that I think coal is worse from a climate point of view than gas. So to me, we haven't talked about the relationship of gas and renewables. We could talk many hours about this. They're very compatible fuels, but the communities see them as not compatible. But to me, to be anti-gas is not about being pro-renewables, it's about accepting coal for a long time. So
Estonia, do you want to talk about Estonia? Estonia is predominantly on oil and gas from shale. Has anyone taken a look at that country's environment and people's health?
Wow, no, I have no idea.
Well, there you are.
I have no idea.
I am proud to say I was invited to speak in Estonia this spring, so I'm not there apparently. So, okay, and here we have the last set of questions, which are thematically united. It's about education and understanding. Do you know of any work in government to charge the National Academy of Science or another credible scientific body to do a definitive report on best practices and greenhouse gas effects if those best practices are followed? And then these are all really wrapped together. What universities are pursuing technological advancements, education and information dissemination is critical. Who or what is the most effective group or agency to provide this service, especially considering issues of public trust? So universities, National Academy of Science, where do we go to?
Right now, I'm on a National Academy of Science committee dealing with public trust issues, where we're going to have a number of workshops to try to talk about these issues and to sponsor a number of papers on them. So the Academy is also considering, I think they're considering, I'm not the president or the member of the Academy, but I understand that they're considering something that takes a look at the EPA factors for how much emissions are coming out of different parts of the value chain of gas. So the Academy's gotten a lot of interest. People always have to pay for those studies. And so getting either foundations or some government agency to do that is obviously very important. You can often, in an era when there's not sequestration happening, you can ask your congressperson or senator to ask the National Academy and to ask an agency to fund something. And I suspect that that's happening now, if we have any money in the United States Treasury.
Here's a place to note to end on.
How was that for a way to answer?
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking.
Thank you so much. You're so nice.
I'll just point out again, same place, same time, Tuesday, and there's Reagan right there, our water quantity person. So,
I'm coming back.
okay, thank you.